Hi everybody, this is part 3 of my response to the mid-year exams being scrapped by the MOE. So in part 1, I explained how exams are a security blanket, so some will feel a bit more naked and vulnerable now that it's been stripped away. In part 2, I tried to show how, actually, as any toddler knows, sometimes nude is good. And so we should really try to let go of traditional assessments and really embrace this new policy. In this video, I want to explore how giving teachers and students more time and space could have lots and lots of benefits. I've been going on and on about alternative assessments, but what on earth are they? They could be anything, which is the exciting part. But it doesn't mean that teachers are just going to concoct assessments any old how. We need to trust them as professionals. There are various educational planning approaches. The one that I was trained in is called Understanding by Design, and it's basically reverse engineering. You start with the learning outcome in mind. What do you want your students to understand by the end of the term or the module or even the lesson? And then you figure out how you're going to assess that they have learned what you want them to learn. And then you come up with the learning activities. You plan lessons that will help your students be able to complete the assessment successfully. Parents should rest assured that alternative assessment doesn't mean that their child is going to be arbitrarily tortured or that the assessments are going to lack rigor. If teachers are using sound educational planning approaches, there are others besides the one that I described, then hopefully alternative assessments could help us attain that utopia where children are learning through having fun. And another benefit is that maybe alternative assessments could kick away the $1.4 billion crutch of the Singapore education system, tuition. I don't think any tuition center would be able to help all students hack the various alternative assessments that schools could come up with. And that would be great, for the students who don't have the financial means to go to all these cram schools. Make Singapore meritocratic again! Let me give one example so that it's clearer what alternative assessments might look like. Beginning with the desired learning outcomes, hopefully teachers can move away from content-based learning outcomes to more skills-based learning outcomes. So an example of a content-based learning outcome could be something like, students will understand that literary texts are influenced by their socio-historical context. So that's a content-based one. And if we reframe it into a skills-based one, it could sound more like students will understand how to research the influence of the socio-historical context on a literary text. The traditional route to assessing the learning outcome would be to maybe set an essay question. For this learning outcome, maybe we could set something like Macbeth by Shakespeare. The plot and themes are greatly influenced by the Elizabethan worldview. Discuss. If the desired learning outcome is content-based, then a teacher could prepare slides for a lecture, prepare some notes that the students can memorize and then regurgitate. That would be relatively fast to do, but with more time, we can do better by our kids. If the desired learning outcome is more based on 21st century competencies, and if you're not sure what these are, you can click on the link in the description below. But if it's more, skills-based, more on how to equip our children for the future, then the learning activities will look very different. For instance, in this particular learning outcome, we hope to cultivate in students like a disposition of curiosity and give them the research skills that they can use to find out more about any area of life that they would need to just out of their own interest or maybe for other curriculum subjects, who knows. The teacher could show students how to find the books they need in the library, show them how to discern reliable sites from unreliable sites, show them what selection factors they need to consider so that they can just narrow down the flood of information sources before they even start researching, etc., etc. Research skills, right? By the end of the module, the students not only acquire the content information that they need to know, but they will also have learned and practiced a set of skills that they can apply to later life, to other contexts. It's great. But if you really want to supercharge students' learning, enter alternative assessments. In one of my previous schools, to assess whether students understood how to research the influence of the socio-historical context on a literary text, we asked secondary 3 students to create a booth at a Renaissance fair to give their schoolmates a better idea of what life was like during Shakespeare's time. Instead of just the Sec 3 cohort learning about quite a narrow sliver of information, the whole school gained exposure to all kinds of aspects of 16th century English life. And the students who took the assignment seriously, they got really good feedback from their peers, and that meant more to them than any marks ever could. The most successful booth was a haunted house, and they had massive queues the whole afternoon because all the students from every class, every level were so curious about the screams that were emanating out from this classroom. So the group that was running it, they would bring small groups of students into the classroom at a time. They converted the classroom into like a dark maze with jump scares that they had successfully reproduced from what they had seen from like Universal Studios Halloween Night or something. And they had actors, theatre students, they performed excerpts from Macbeth, with the witches chanting. Lest you think everybody was having too much fun to have actually learnt anything, actually the haunted house demonstrated the students' understanding of Macbeth as a horror story of its time. The socio-historical context was 16th century England, where they believed in a natural order of things preordained by God. It's called the Great Chain of Being. So Macbeth's ambition for the crown was unnatural, and this resulted in a lot of frightening imagery in the play. Their choice to perform the witches chanting was especially apt because these women were unruly and they stood outside the natural order. Unlike schools and syllabuses, they were not subjugated by a government or time. Another hit was a photo booth where students could try on period clothing, and another group did a stall that sold Renaissance era food, which the students all cooked themselves. Teachers provided some guidance and support, but most of all this was really student directed, and they were enthusiastic. They didn't need to be pushed because they had been given the autonomy in the first place to wed their non-academic interests with the requirements for this assignment. I'm sure you would agree that the lessons learned in preparing for this assessment were much more memorable and more meaningful than anything that could be gained from mugging for an exam. Crucially, the students were able to be creative and were able to tackle real-world problems like how are they going to communicate what they have learned to an audience? How are they going to attract people to their booth? How are they going to stick to a budget, stick to a timeline, and execute their vision, right? All these things are transferable to working life. On the flip side, there were those who did not buy into this alternative assessment. After the Renaissance Fair, a contingent of parents came to complain to the upper management that their children had wasted an entire afternoon manning a booth that had seen no business. Now, of course, their booths had no business because the booths were uninteresting or provided very little insight into life during the Renaissance era. And of course, the booths did not have this interesting information because the students had not invested enough time or effort into researching the assignment. So they didn't do well in it. And we'll talk about a great chain of being. The parents of those students whose booths did not perform well were upset at one wasted afternoon, but the successful students had spent many afternoons on their projects, and I think they would say that those weren't wasted afternoons at all. And I think that the students that didn't do well in this assessment could also learn an important lesson. If you don't apply yourself, you will fail. In the real world, there are no shortcuts, and you don't always get quick and easy results. And I hope that those parents and all parents out there will become more open to accepting the benefits and the legitimacy of alternative assessments. That's one big reason why I'm coming up with this opinion. That Renaissance Fair was so much fun. It was opened with the ceremonial slaying of a unicorn. The vice principal dressed up like a queen and smashed this unicorn piñata full of confetti which went everywhere. And we brought in this Bastion Historical Fencing Academy to teach the kids sword fighting, and they did a demonstration with a lot of slashed watermelons. We had a bagpipe band come in from another school since we were learning the Scottish play. It was so much fun, but of course it took a lot of time for both teachers and students to prepare. And I hope that with the freed up curriculum time, these are the kinds of shenanigans that schools could get up to more often. I guess if we want our kids to think in a non-traditional way, then of course it makes sense that they should learn in a non-traditional way and be tested in a non-traditional way. And there's a lot that you cannot pick up from just reading books. One of my previous schools was an IP school, so they didn't have to do the O-levels, and with the last 2 terms of Sec 4, they used that freed up curriculum time to make it more like a liberal arts college, where students could pick and choose different kinds of courses like like beatboxing or learning how to fly a light aircraft, learning scuba diving, or they could do a work attachment, or they could go on overseas exchange. This was before COVID. And they could also just work on a project that they had initiated themselves. Now, this was a very well-resourced school, but wouldn't it be amazing if more schools in Singapore could have something like that and more Singaporean students could experience this? More time could also mean fewer lecture-style lessons. Now, we already know that students always learn concepts better when they are allowed to construct the knowledge at their own pace, right? Just think about how you learn how to tie your own shoelaces. You just had to try and try until you could successfully do it on your own. If somebody was always tying your shoelaces for you, yeah, you would get your shoes on faster, but you would never really master it properly for yourself. And it's the same with all kinds of learning. With the more curriculum time, hopefully students will have that space to build their own knowledge. Constructivist pedagogies take time, which hopefully schools will now have more of. Another benefit of getting rid of the mid-year exams is that students will be better able to focus on their co-curricular activities unhindered. And very often the mid-year exams comes in the middle of or like very near to big competition seasons or SYF season, and sometimes students focus their attentions on their CCAs, and then that's why they don't do well in the mid-years, and then they get called up for remedial in the June holidays, which is really unproductive. It's an indictment on these students that maybe they're lazy, but actually they weren't. And it's no fun as well for the teachers who also have to come back and conduct these remedial sessions. And who says that this freed up curriculum time needs to be redirected into academic pursuits? One thing I really longed for as a teacher was more time to just get to know my students, to do pastoral care. There are some who really have things going on in their lives, and if all we want from them is grades and studying, then we are not helping them as human beings. We're not connecting on that level, and of course they feel like nobody cares about them, right? I sometimes felt that way as a student, and that is one big reason why I wanted to become a teacher, because I did have teachers who made the effort to reach out to me. But you just do the math, like I used to get my students to all sit down and write an essay, so the classroom was all quiet, and then I'll call them up one at a time to just have a short chat with them. And if I gave each student in a class of 40 just 5 minutes, that will already take up more than 3 hours of lesson time. So I hope you can see with more curriculum time, maybe time could be spent with teachers deepening relationships with their students. Students could also develop closer relationships with each other. Schools could lengthen or add more special events like orientation, outward bound school, inter-house, inter-class competitions, community service, and all these things really help students to bond together and enrich the whole schooling experience. Within the classroom, there could be more peer teaching, and this could enable higher achieving students to have a greater sense of empathy, greater sense of humility. Even just letting the kids have more time to chat with each other would go a long way towards making school a warmer place. There really is so much to gain from jettisoning mid-year exams and moving away from traditional assessments if only teachers, parents, and students are more willing to take unconventional journeys. And I believe those are called adventures. So bring me that horizon. If you enjoyed these opinions, I hope that you'll subscribe for more. This channel is mainly about parenting, what to do with your kids, but from time to time, I guess I will chime in on various issues. So I hope to see you next time. Bye!